Hello and good afternoon. We are so thankful that you are joining us here today for the Willow Lunch and Learn Speaker Series. I have just been cracking up with my dear friend Dave Rogers, who we have the privilege and honor to interview with us here today. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Lindsay. I don't know what you're talking about. We're serious all the time. We never laugh because we don't have a sense of humor that we're aware of. So we're good.
Dave is an awesome friend and partner anti-trafficking movement, and we are going to have a really fun time interviewing him here today. Dave joins us from the Human Trafficking Institute, which is a wonderful partner of Willow International's. We always talk about the importance of collaboration in this sector in fighting trafficking, and the Human Trafficking Institute and Dave Rogers are incredible collaborators, incredible allies in the fight for human trafficking. When we talk about an organization who can really focus in on a specific aspect of their expertise and do that well, and then collaborate with others, that is the Human Trafficking Institute to a T. They are great, and Dave himself comes to us with 23 and a half years of service with the FBI and 5 years working in the nonprofit sector, most of that time committed to anti-trafficking work. So he is someone with a wealth of experience, a lot of fun stories, a great sense of humor, and it's going to be a privilege to honor you and talk with you today, Dave.
Thanks. I very much appreciate the invite. So I'm really looking forward to this, Kelsey. Any chance to hang out with you is always a good day.
Same. We always have fun. So my first question for you, Dave, and for our audience, we're going to start out with some curated questions, and then we will open it up to you. So if you have questions, you can start now by entering them into the chat function, or we will let you know when that Q&A is beginning, and you can save them for later.
I know the first question, Kelsey, is going to be, am I in fact wearing business attire on my entire body? And the answer is, to be truthful, no. So.
Well, we can't blame you, Dave.
It's the new norm.
It is the new norm. Well, you look profesh up top.
Thanks.
So, Dave, with over 25 years dedicated in federal law enforcement, can you tell us how you got started in the anti-trafficking field?
Sure. It's actually a surprise to me. It was really late in my career. I was teaching at the FBI Academy when I first learned about human trafficking, and just couldn't believe that slavery still existed. It was shocking and appalling to me, and also it was one of those times where I knew exactly what I was going to be doing. And I rarely post on social media, but I posted that day. I know what I'm doing for the rest of my life. Like most people, I had been raised with an education that said slavery didn't exist anymore. It had been eradicated. And to learn the real truth about that, and then go, wait, I actually have a skill set that cross-sects in society with an actual need. And so it was calling for me right at that moment, if that makes any sense. So, yeah, it was pretty late in my career, and then it was a matter of dedicating myself to, I didn't need to learn how to conduct investigations. I did that. In fact, I was teaching that at the time. It was what's this particular law? What's this particular crime? How does it manifest itself? How do I engage with, because it's such a holistic community, right? To be able to approach it from so many different levels. And so it became kind of an apprenticeship at that point, and then culminating for the last 4 years of my career with the FBI, actually running their trafficking program. So in the civil rights unit. So it was great. I mean, it's just, everything fell into place to be able to do what I found a passion for, and to be able to stay focused on that.
That's amazing. I know so many people who listen in on these calls, and people I talk to about anti-trafficking, they have a passion about getting involved in this work. And it's really hard for many to figure out how they can do that practically through their career or through their volunteer work. So amazing that you've been able to do that through your professional life.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I'm really also, I want to advocate for, is that you don't have to be a social worker. You don't have to be an attorney. You don't have to be a law enforcement person like me to be able to interact with this. This community needs all kinds of people. We need people who can write good copy. We need people who are really creative, who can interact with the community. We need people who are great at strategizing and organizing. I remember trying to hire for an investigator, and I had somebody call me up and said, listen, I'm really, really excited. I want this job. And I'm like, awesome. Tell me about your background. And he goes, oh, I do heating and air conditioning. And I went, well, brother, you can't work for me. And he got really upset. He's like mad. He's like, well, what am I supposed to do? I said, well, there's a couple of options for you. One is you could quit your job, join the police force, become a police officer, then become a detective, learn how to conduct investigations. Meanwhile, all the time volunteering at local anti-trafficking organizations so you can learn the issue. Or what you could do is you could volunteer at anti-trafficking organizations and find out where they need your skills. There are so many facilities that could use in-kind gifts of free air conditioning and things, that kind of stuff. And so let's not just be so focused on there's only one way to do this. Marry your passion with subject matter expertise, and then move forward.
Dave, that brings me to something you and I have talked about a lot, and a question that I had for you, which is, people are passionate. They become very passionate about this issue, like you and I both have. It's
Sure.
when you learn that slavery exists, many people have the response that they want to do anything they possibly can to stop that and to help those who have been enslaved. So with your experience in law enforcement, what is your response to either civilians who want to get engaged in rescuing a victim, or maybe organizations that are doing that work? How does that sometimes interfere, or does it sometimes interfere with the work
It
of
does
law
sometimes. I
enforcement?
mean, some organizations do it very well, right? Some organizations have good policies. They hire people who were investigators, in previous life, and they do things well. At the Human Trafficking Institute, our model is to actually engage with the governments and help the government facilities that actually have the authority and they actually have the responsibility to actually interact and engage with on the prosecution side of it, with the investigation and prosecution of cases, to help them get better. Sometimes organizations will work outside of the governments, and while that has worked to some degree, what you're not doing is helping that government get any better, because ultimately, say in Uganda's trafficking problem is ultimately Uganda's trafficking problem. And they need to be able to develop the subject matter expertise and the passion and the wherewithal financially within their own country to be able to address that issue. Similarly, in the United States, it's the US's problem. Listen, it's a global issue and we need to be able to partner together. But standing on the outside is that old saying, right? You know what I mean? We're actually bringing fish to people instead of teaching them to fish. But I'll tell you, the first part of your question is people who aren't skilled and who are passionate, that can be really, really dangerous. And too often, even with some of those organizations that are founded by passionate people who don't think through the unintended consequences of, okay, we've rescued these people. Have we actually shut down the trafficker? Because if we haven't, maybe we've actually just endangered 5 more people because that trafficker is still going to want a cadre of people to traffic. And so this issue takes a lot of thought, and it takes a lot of coordination with enforcement entities, governmental and non-governmental, but it also takes all of the aftercare people as well. So frankly, passion without subject matter expertise is extraordinarily dangerous. And there's no excuse for it. There's no excuse. You can have passion, and you need to have passion, but you need to marry it with subject matter expertise too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you mentioned your approach in Uganda, and the approach of the Human Trafficking Institute is partnering and working with governments. Could you talk a little bit more about what that model looks like and what your role is in that?
Sure. Yeah. The Human Trafficking Institute was founded by 2 former prosecutors in the U.S. Department of Justice Human Trafficking Prosecution Unit. And based on a model of, listen, what have we seen work here? That, you know what I mean, that can actually go after things. And it's a pretty simple recipe. And there's no like, this isn't Coke's famous recipe, you know what I mean, that needs to be hidden. And it's pretty straightforward. Create dedicated, specialized units whose only function is to go after, on the anti-trafficking approach. They're not being pulled away to do other investigations. They're not being pulled away to prosecute other types of crimes. That's what they do, right? And they specialize in that. The second part of that model is you actually then train them to actually conduct investigations. And you train prosecutors and police and victim witness coordinators. You train them all together so they know each other's roles. So there's a holistic approach from the outset so that you have a prosecution-led model of investigation right from the beginning. And that includes how do we then partner with the other non-governmental organizations that are going to necessarily be part of that approach. So you get all of that together. You've done the training because this requires specialization and it requires special training. It's not unlearnable. We're not reattaching retinas or anything like that, right? I mean, it's something that can be learned, but it does have to be taught. Trauma-informed interviewing, victim-centered approaches are things, and those are all buzzwords that get used in this community, but they actually mean something, and they have to be taught, and they're not necessarily intuitive. And so law enforcement, my experience with leading the program in the FBI, law enforcement needs to be taught to slow down and to be able to take your time and to be able to recognize that success may in fact not be your case moving forward, but in fact, a victim becoming a survivor. That could actually be a definition of success, and you've had a successful case. And then the final component to that, to our model, is embedding experts within the governments that we partner with to act as mentors and guides. You know, we have an expert prosecutor who ran the prosecution unit in one of the municipalities in Texas, and he ran it really, really well. He's now in Uganda, working directly with the prosecutors, talking to them about cases, giving them guidance on those kinds of things, all of whom are really, really smart people, the prosecutors that he works with and the police that he worked with, but maybe this isn't their area of expertise. And so to be able to bring that partnership along to then build the expertise within their own program so it becomes self-sustaining, and so we don't need to be there anymore. And my role as the director of law enforcement operations is to really kind of oversee our country work in the two countries where we are operating now, Belize and Uganda, partner with the government agencies that we have to partner with. So police, prosecutors, judiciary, but also with the NGO communities, and be part of that to let them know we're part of a holistic response, but we are not a holistic organization. Like you said at the beginning, we stay focused on the area that we know. The analogy I like to use is like, listen, we know the investigation and prosecution of trafficking stuff. That's what we know, all right? We know about aftercare. We want to partner with organizations like Willow who know aftercare. You know what I mean? And so you don't want us running a shelter, but you also need us to know the needs and the necessity of that as well. We can't be so focused that we can't see that there is a holistic approach that's needed, but we need expertise. Each area needs people with expertise in those areas.
And one thing I love about our partnership is that we bring each other in to trainings and different work that we do, so that as you're informing law enforcement, training them, they get to hear from the victim service providers. They get to have an understanding of what victims are going through and why an interview or an investigation may not be similar to other ones that they've done because of the type of victimization. You mentioned this approach. It must require some buy-in from government. And so I want to understand why you chose Uganda as one of the country locations to work in.
We wanted to, trafficking is definitely happening in the developed world, no question about it, right? But the majority of trafficking globally is happening in the developing world. And so we were blessed by pre-existing relationships with other organizations that were doing work with the judiciary in Uganda, and we were invited in to Uganda with you. That's where you and I first met, actually, to participate in some training of judges and police and prosecutors and attorneys and civil society organizations for a couple of days in June of 2017 on trafficking, on Uganda's trafficking statute, not trafficking in general, but really diving into the specifics of their statute, which is a fairly robust statute. And from that, we were able to take relationships that had previously existed through other organizations, Willow and Pepperdine, with the judiciary, and then we were able to begin and form our own relationships as well. And so it kind of was born from that. I don't think we specifically woke up and, threw a dart at the map and said, Uganda it is, okay? But there are a ton of resources. There's political will, which was always important for us. Any country that we are going to partner in, they have to have political will, that they're going to engage in the issue as well. And that they'll be willing to put their own resources towards some of it. And it's small incremental steps, and to get them to understand that it's not an overnight fix, that you can't expect all of this. I mean, there's cultural shifts that have to occur. There's an understanding about trafficking that is actually happening in their own country, not just trafficking abroad. All of those kinds of things are going to take a long time. But the key component is getting them to acknowledge the need for specialization, and then start creating structures within their own government to support that. And Uganda has been pretty supportive on that. All along. It doesn't mean it's not without challenges, but so, I mean, those challenges are to be expected. So.
Yeah, I remember one of the trainings that we did together, we spoke with the Chief Justice, and I remember him saying, Willow and other organizations, they help the government understand that these issues exist in their countries. He wasn't aware of the extent of the issue. And so by simply coming in and becoming allies with these certain individuals, building relationships, you can make an impact.
And I think that's the advantage of the approach that we're taking, that you take as well, is that to actually partner with the government agencies, because you can come in and say and recognize, listen, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to go into Uganda and realize that trafficking is occurring in Uganda. You just need to drive through the streets of Kampala and see the street kids begging and watching the adults watch them to be able to tell you that there's a problem here. Okay, you can go into the neighborhoods and see the brothels that are going. I mean, it's not hard to see. You can go and find those places, but to come in and actually not partner with the government agencies that are responsible for actually addressing it, you're never really going to get to the root of the problem. And so. And so for us, our approach is we want to partner with organizations that are in fact engaging with the governments, but we're going to partner with those who are having an impact as well. And some of them, their model is not ours to go as close to the government as they can, as we are, where they're actually embedding people with the governments, but they're still recognizing that there's need for governmental intervention. And that's fine. That's their organization's model. And, but you're right. The getting the government to see that there was a need was the first step. And I remember a couple of years ago, just being in Uganda, kind of just frustrated. They had agreed we need to have specialized units. We need in the police. We need to have specialized units in the prosecutor's office. They had set up a prosecutor who was the coordinator, and still so hard. And I was talking to a friend who was an attorney who was working for us in the prosecutor's office, and she says, "Dave, if they were doing it great, we wouldn't need to be here." So, and that's true. And again, that is not in any way to malign Uganda's. It's just, it was not their focus for a while. And now you have officials in there who actually are so passionate about it that they weep at the idea of survivors being trapped or victims being trapped in those situations. And they weep at the idea of people being rescued from that who are now actually survivors and can actually speak into those things. So it's powerful when you start getting the officials to engage fully.
Yeah, I remember it. That's a moment I will never forget. One of our training or advocacy events, we had a survivor who wanted to share her story. Closed doors, no media.
Yep.
She shared what happened with her because she wanted her government to take action.
Yep.
And many, many members of the government, I think you remember this, came up and hugged her or shook her hand and said, "We didn't understand, and now we do, and we're going to do something about it." So it wasn't necessarily that they didn't want to, they didn't understand.
No,
And,
it was like
and the
me. I mean, when I
numbers.
first found out about it, listen, it's ignorance, and not in you're calling somebody ignorant to insult them. It's ignorance. It's a lack of understanding. And you know what? That's fixable, but now it needs to be fixed with more than just platitudes and bumper stickers and things like that. It actually, real action has to take place. And I think that's the part. I think if there are donors or funders on these take a while. So, to see these changes, please understand that they can be really small incremental steps, but actually getting investigators who now have a specialized training in this and can start seeing that they have this issue, and they can start looking at something that they would have always called defilement or something like that. And then now they think, wait, I actually have a copy of the trafficking statute, which I never had before. And that makes more sense here. And now I can reach out because there's a specialized prosecutor, and I can talk to that prosecutor and we can get advice on what to do and move forward. Those are massive seismic steps forward that maybe move the needle just a little, but eventually will have exponential effects, and they'll move it, very, at a high level. If that makes any sense.
I remember sitting in some of our trainings and getting stories from our staff who have done trainings who say that there's a moment that the police and the investigators have an aha moment,
Mm-hmm.
and they go, oh my goodness, so many of the cases I've seen were actually trafficking cases. I didn't even know that this was a law in the country. So Dave, on that note, what are some of the successes that you've seen in Uganda since you started your work there?
Yeah, there's many. The first was getting the government to acknowledge there's a need for specialization within the police and the prosecutors, and in fact in the judiciary as well. So now there is, in fact, there used to be there's two entities in the prosecutor's office, both of whom were working on trafficking cases, who never talked to each other, never coordinated. And now there's actually a dedicated prosecutor who's the coordinator for all those cases. She doesn't prosecute all the cases, but she's the coordinator. And we now have our embedded expert who's working with her, who can speak directly into how to prosecute cases well. There's actually a coalition of anti-trafficking organizations, because it seems like there's 1,322 organizations working in Uganda, all doing different things, and nobody knows about it. And now getting a coalition of them together, and they can actually start speaking into this as a more unified body. We've seen police who were at first giving us the Heisman and stiff-arming us and not wanting to talk to us at all, now say, hey, listen, we need to have dedicated unit. And they've actually created, we said a unit. They said, no, let's have an entire department set up, which is awesome until it's not, because now you need to fund an entire department. It's actually creating a new bureaucracy within their own government. And that has proven to take longer. But the mindset behind it is, we know this is an issue. I remember the first time we ever met with the Inspector General of Police, his second day in office, by the way, he actually, condescended to see us, actually. And I remember meeting with him. And the attorney that was living there for us, Tanama, she was with us in the meeting. And he looks right at his senior investigators, because all of trafficking cases in Uganda before then were being investigated out of the sexual and gender-based violence unit in the police. And he looked right at her. He's a former prosecutor. And he said, look, these have to actually be a separate unit. It needs to be separate and distinct from the SGBV unit. And he got it right from that moment. I remember looking over at my partner going, wait, what? I didn't say that. I mean, it wasn't that. So they get it and they need it. So there are cases, big cases and little cases that are now talking, and they're discussing with one another. They're actually calling Willow in and other organizations and other, service providers in the area, and they're calling them in about how can we coordinate so that we can get the best possible care for victims. Is it perfect? No, of course it's not perfect, but it's not perfect in the US either. Let's not pretend, but they're starting to coordinate. And to me, that's now they're starting to move in the right direction in that regard. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I remember celebrating after you met with the Inspector General of Police. We were both in Uganda at that time, and we were over the moon by his enthusiasm and support.
It was a year in getting that meeting. So yeah, it was, yeah.
It takes time. Imagine a year. For those of you who are listening to this and working in the sector, or even funders of the space, it does take a long time, but that type of a meeting and that type of an outcome is worth the entire year.
And that's thank you. I interrupted you, but that's the value. Like one of the former founders of our organization, I think, spoke with you guys, John Richmond. He would talk about it all the time. Physical presence matters. You have to actually be there. and you have to, that's why taking so many trips, which are a nightmare to get there, but when it's taking so many trips, and when you get there, having those face-to-face meetings and not just relying on email, or frankly, email doesn't even work. You have to WhatsApp people to let them know you've emailed them. All right. That kind of stuff, but actually have the in-person meetings. And it's easy. I think sometimes it's easy for them to go, yes, that's a very good idea. Yes, it's a really good idea. But to then start implementing the change, when they invited us in to help them write the proposal to create this police department, we knew they were serious about it, And in fact, it was kind of daunting. Like, this is your department, we'll come and we'll talk to you about it, but you guys need to really be writing what makes most sense for you. So yeah, there's been a lot of successes. There's still a lot of room to grow, right? But tons of success.
We are so impressed. I'm so impressed with the work you guys have done, and I'm so glad that you chose to work in Uganda. It's been such an incredible partnership.
It has. It's been fun.
It has
Oh,
been
wait, I'm
fun.
sorry. Sorry. No, I mean, it's been
Are
all
we not
business
allowed to
all
have
the time.
fun? We can't.
Never. It's all business all the time.
A little bit of fun.
Mm.
So, Dave, I imagine people are interested in hearing about the FBI and your
Sure.
time there. So, I want to make sure we address some of that. So, maybe is there a case, or not a specific case, but a story, something you can share
Sure.
with us about your time, something that has stuck with you and maybe informed your approach today?
Yeah. No, I appreciate you asking that. And I'm aware that, because that's in my background, people want to talk about that. I need to understand, I don't represent the FBI. I'm not allowed to kind of talk about, I can't say things on behalf of the FBI. The FBI is doing a pretty good job in their anti-trafficking approach. They actually are working it, and they've grown. They've grown over the time since in the 20 years that the trafficking law has been in existence in the States. So they, with other organizations, they've grown, and they now take a really collaborative approach, and they need to work with other organizations. And there's part of the collaborative task force model that they're part of with state and local law enforcement, as well as other federal law enforcement partners and local prosecutors, and being part of those and taking focused, dedicated efforts. There's not a ton of officers in the bureau, or agents is what we call them, that are dedicated specifically to trafficking. But it's interesting, where we have seen them dedicated, we've seen a kind of an exponential increase in the number of traffickers who get identified and of cases that get done. There were several cases that I oversaw. I ran the program. I did just a little bit of the investigating trafficking cases, and those were when I was in Afghanistan. And but when I oversaw the program, one of the first cases I ever came across was the most horrific I've ever seen in my life, ever to this day. Just the abuse of a mentally disabled woman. Just she was electrocuted. People would call in on the internet to pay for somebody to actually shock her and electrocute her and put nails in her, and things like that. And yeah, it was really, really horrific, and I loved seeing them go to jail for a long period of time. And it went on for 5 years. It was awful. But the thing that you asked, what has kind of shaped my thoughts on that? That was one of my earliest cases that I ever saw. And again, I was overseeing the program. I wasn't the one who was enmeshed in the day to day with that actual survivor. And so I can't imagine the pain for that agent to work with, let alone the pain for the victim too, right? But that case, and I remember actually thinking at the time, I need to be careful not to expect every case to be this horrific. So I mean, because we can start thinking in terms of the stereotypes, right? Like, this case is it's so bad, and if they're not that bad, then it can't be trafficking. I mean, there are cases where people have just been threatened with their reputational harm, and they've been able to do something. They haven't been beaten or anything, but it was enough to coerce them into something, and that still is trafficking. And so yes, there are the horrific, really, really excessive amounts of violence and abuse that go into this, but there are ones that you would look at it and go, it's not that bad. We can't ever get in the mind frame where we say, it's not that bad. It was bad enough to get them to do something against their will. And if that's the case, then it's something we need to be taking seriously as well. So yeah, it was it's a great career. I love that I got to do that, and I love that I've gotten to continue to do it since then. So
What learnings from that time have you taken into the international work that you do now?
Well, primarily victim-centered approach, and that's such a cliche. Oh my gosh, part of me almost hates actually using that phrase now. And trauma-informed interviewing, to understand the damage that trauma does. And I think this is the part that law enforcement around the world needs to get. They're going People who have been victimized in trafficking are going to lie to you, and it's not because they're malicious, it's not because they're evil. Their memories are going to be all over the place, and it's not law enforcement's job to make them tell it to you in a cogent fashion. It's law enforcement's job to take the pieces that they tell you and put it in cogent fashion. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? We can't be putting the burden on victims to talk about their victimization in a way that makes a prosecution a great case. Victim-centered means redefining what success looks like. It can't just be the measurables of law enforcement metrics, number of arrests, number of convictions, indictments, those kinds of things, which are all very important, right? Because they definitely have a deterrent effect on the future traffickers. But we also need to be prepared to say, hey, if we can get somebody to a state of self-determination, that's a massive success. And getting law enforcement to understand. So those are kinds of the lessons that are applicable irrespective of your jurisdiction. So they're not lying to you because they don't like you. They may be lying to you because they don't trust you, because most government entities are not trusted by trafficking victims, at least at first. You can't assume you're walking in with having any trust at all. You have to earn that trust all the time. Those are big lessons that have carried along through that. And that's stuff that has to get taught. I remember teaching law enforcement all the time. You are not the knights in shining armor coming in to save the day. You're just not. And if you want them to open up to you, you've got to be available to them. You actually need to just reach out to them and say, hey, I've got nothing new to tell you. I just wanted to say I'm thinking about you, and I'm still working really hard on your behalf. That's all you got to do. And it's not hard. Taking a victim-centered approach is not hard, but you have to do your homework, and you have to know, and you can't let your feelings get hurt. That's hard. So
You brought up an important aspect of this, which is that victims will often lie
go on.
to investigators. And one story that has just fascinated me, our mutual friend Helen Sworn conducted a 10-year longitudinal research study. And what they found was that in year 4 of the study, the stories were changing.
Sure.
Victims. And they thought that the research project was just finished, like who was going to fund it, all the data had changed. But it actually turned out to be really important research, because they were able to ask, why did these stories change? And the victim said, well, now I finally trust you enough to tell you. But it took 4 years.
4 years. And listen, federal law enforcement, by the way, in the United States has the advantage of time compared to the state and local municipalities that they have to be on the street all the time. They're getting called out all the time, and they're investigators. So teaching that and getting them to understand that, getting them in foreign countries to understand that it is that they don't trust you, to be able to say, you should not be taking this personally when they do that. And sometimes they're just never going to open up fully to you, to be able to expect it. But we also have to teach them what we don't get to do is we don't get to actually erase all of the reports that we had when they told us one version of events. We're stuck with those. And then they tell us, they finally start trusting us, a long period down the road. We now have differing reports. And I've had to actually counsel some law enforcement in some foreign countries that I've worked, that you don't get to just tear out of the notebook the old out of your case file, the old reports that they gave you. And they're like, but it's harmful to our case. And I'm like, yeah, but that's kind of the rule of law thing, and we have to be able to deal with that. Actually, and investigators are so afraid of, like, we have to document the lies. Well, now there's going to be a change. It's awesome. When they start to trust you, you can now ask them simply, tell me why you told it to me a little bit differently before. I mean, there's a way you said it before. Don't call him a liar. That's stupid. Okay. But you don't do that. But you say, how this is a little bit different from what you told me before. And they'll start talking to you. I didn't trust you because I was taught to never trust law enforcement. Or, you look just like my trafficker. You know what I mean? Or you you're law enforcement. I know you have a gun. I got abused by a gun too. All of a sudden, all of the actual forms of coercion start coming out. I was afraid. I didn't trust you. I was told I would be deported if I said these things. All of the things that were used against them. And now you actually have a really good case. You don't have to hide from those. You don't have to hide from those stories. You actually bring them out in your case in chief and say, this is how well programmed they were by their trafficker, that they actually, to the people who had the authority to give them help, they would actually push away that help until they had actually earned that trust. It's important stuff.
And it's not a hard lesson to teach an investigator. It's such a simple, the way that you put it is so simple and easy to understand.
But it's hard because we're humans, okay? And so, and most of the people that I know in law enforcement, and this may be a timely statement, and I hope it is for my friends who are in law enforcement, this 67.3% of all stats are made up on the spot, and I'm getting ready to do that right now. So 99.9% of all law enforcement are in it for the right reasons, and they do it the right way. They want to help people, and they want to actually make our society better. That's why they got into this, So, and most of us also are type A people. So that when I go to you and you need help and you lie to me, the instinct is like, you're dead to me. I'm going to move on. So that's the part that's not instinctive. You actually need to teach the law enforcement, dig into this, go deeper, take your time. Don't immediately shut them down, because there's a lot of people who will take your help and you can move on. The trauma that's done to them. And that's why it's so important to understand the impacts trauma actually have as well. That trauma actually impacts their interaction with law enforcement and with other government agencies, but hugely with law enforcement and the prosecutors as well, to an area of distrust, and they can want to manipulate you, and they can try, and they try to do that all the time, and do things. But you have to be able to have patience, and you have to be able to dive through. And that is not something that's intuitive. And to those law enforcement agencies that are so busy because there's so few of them that they don't have the luxury of time like the federal law enforcement do, it's even harder to do. So it's easy to explain. It's hard to actually put into practice.
I imagine that's why you're committed to the work that you are in Uganda,
Mm-hmm.
which is mentorship and working cases alongside, so that it's not just a one-day training, here's the information,
Yeah. Yeah.
that will get lost. It has to be an ongoing relationship.
Right. The irony, we talked about it, is, it has to be better than the 2 days at the Sheraton. In fact, but that's where we met. And that's where, where we actually started our relationships, with a 2-day at the Sheraton. In fact, the best part of those 2-day trainings are the relationships that you build and the people that you meet. But, measurable impact of change comes only because those relationships get built to the point where you can start pushing people. And and I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, you could start taking people beyond where they currently are. And so yeah, it sure takes longer than 2 days at the Sheraton to get some stuff done. Although
It
those
does.
are fun days too. So
They are, and great for advocacy as well.
totally.
Talking about relationships, one thing that Lillian, who our program director in Uganda,
Please
shared
talk.
she's fabulous. And one of the things that gave her hope was how the investigators and the law enforcement that we work with and that our organizations have trained have changed their approach
Right.
when working with victims in Uganda. And they listen to our staff. When our staff say, hey, that police uniform is not going to go over well. That
Right.
gun that you have,
Right.
leave it behind.
Right.
Here's how you can talk to the survivor. They've requested their case manager to be present. They've been really able and willing to work with us.
Yeah,
And
you needed a special room in their headquarters, like for the children of survivors or victims to be able to come in and have a place for them to stay. Yeah, it's excellent.
It is. And it just speaks to this collaborative approach when you have organizations who focus on what they're good at, working together and working with the government. It's just magic. Magic can happen.
It is. I think the word collaboration gets used as a magical panacea sometimes, though. And I think it's similar to my cautions about passion without subject matter expertise. It has to be collaborations with the right people who are doing it the right way. and finding those people and finding people that can build relationships with governmental entities and that can build relationships with the non-governmental entities and be able to work well together. I mean, the reality is people are, particularly in the nonprofit world, we're funded by various people and we're answerable to the donors that are, that fund our organization. And that too often can lead to a sense of competition, as opposed to, for me, I think there's an abundance of resources and people are willing to put them if they will see that people are willing to work with other people. Because how dare any organization say they have the full expertise in every component of this? It's just that organization does not exist, and so, I love that you guys aren't trying to be expert interviewers or investigators, interviewers from an investigative component, you know what I mean? I love that we're not trying to be shelter providers. And it's awesome. We don't have to be. I love that. It's awesome to know what we know and to know what we don't know. In fact, it's so important to know what we don't know and to embrace it so that we can then collaborate with others. It takes a holistic approach. You will never, and I will say this till the day I die, you will never stop trafficking. You'll never change trafficking if you don't have strong enforcement. If you're not putting traffickers in jail, you're never going to stop it. But the criticism I get from that is you can't prosecute your way out of this issue. And you're right. You can't counsel your way out of this issue either. It takes all of us working in unison together to be able to do it. But we have to all do it. And we have to put our efforts into what we know, into the areas that we can focus on really well.
Couldn't agree more. I think you and I have spoken about collaboration
We
a
may or
lot.
may not have had glasses of wine talking about this.
We're very passionate about good collaboration.
Yeah. Not collaboration as the ends, collaboration as the means. And that's so important.
It is. And every once in a while, you get a collaborator who also becomes a good friend, and that makes it even more fun.
I love that we've reached that point. It's so good. It is our benefit to be partnering with Willow. It is our, it's frankly not just our benefit. It is, all right, because we get to say, hey, we work with Willow. We get to actually say that to our donors and to our funders. But we also get to work with other organizations who are doing really good work too, and that's hugely important. Most importantly, though, good collaboration means victims are getting rescued, right? That phrase is really so overused, okay? But they're getting taken out of their area where they're being exploited, and then they're getting the appropriate help that they need for them, age appropriate, gender appropriate, but also like mental health care appropriate, job skills training appropriate, and traffickers are being held accountable. It needs to be both. So.
Yep. And, collaboration, sometimes it results in a great friendship, but you don't have to be friends with the people you collaborate with at all.
Most people don't like me, so I love that you do. We do have to be able to work together though, right? So.
Exactly. So Dave, the story that you shared from your time in the FBI, it has me thinking, they're not all that horrific.
Nope.
But a lot of these stories are horrific, and they can be discouraging. They can be heartbreaking. People ask me a lot, how do you do this work? Or they ask our staff, how do you stay hopeful and joyful? And I'd love to ask you that same question. What gives you hope? What keeps fueling you in this work?
There's a couple of things, but I want to touch a little bit on the one thing I didn't realize was how much trauma was being done to me in the work that I did for a living, and even before trafficking, but other things, and how that stuff that I saw, things that, as a crime scene investigator as well, just that kind of stuff and the impact. It's so important to have self-care for staff of people who are working on those. So we can't undervalue that. And it's literally been within the last year that for the first time I ever spoke with somebody about that. And they're taking through all these things that are signs of post-traumatic stress that are related to secondary trauma from this. I hit every single one of them. I actually went home and I told my wife, I said, I actually think I need professional help. And I mean, I've been told that for years, okay? But I mean, but I actually meant it. And so it's so important to get the self-care or not self-care, the care for the caregivers is so important. But yeah, what gives me hope is the fact that there are people now getting degrees in social justice issues and in trafficking, advanced degrees in school. So there are so many really, really smart, passionate people who are engaging this issue. And from all walks of life, from all cultures, from all nations, every country on the planet now acknowledges that it's actually real. Whereas when I grew up, as I said at the beginning, we were taught that slavery didn't exist. So that's what gives me hope. We're in the middle, and the generations, and you can see it right now in what's happening in our country right now. You got people that are fighting for social justice, and you got people that are willing to sacrifice for social justice. And many people always have throughout time. Now, though, we're in this era of history where we actually might see very real change happen right in front of our very eyes. And I love it. That's what gives me hope. There are people who are passionate, who are also smart, who are also subject matter experts, who also want to partner and engage with other people. That's the part that gives me hope in this.
That's beautiful. I love that. And I just want to applaud you for getting help, Dave. It's not an easy thing to do. And I've been in this field many less years than you have. Um,
It
and
was
it's
really, I
real. The
mean,
secondhand, not to make you sound old, Dave, but
I am old. That's
the
I'm fine with that. I'm
the
fine with
secondhand trauma is real, and our team talks about it a lot. We're
that.
thankful to have. We even have foundations and funders who support self-care for our team,
Yeah.
who help us make sure that that's a part of our programming. Imago Dei Fund, we are so
Oh,
grateful
nice.
for their support in that. But many organizations, many people don't realize the impact that it has,
Right.
and you have to be proactive in
I
getting that support.
do. And I think, I was raised in the ilk. I mean, I'm a military, I'm a law enforcement guy, I'm all of those things. And so it's like, you don't, you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and you don't, you, I mean, we definitely always joked, and really at macabre levels, okay, of jokes that we had amongst our peers, but to then go seek professional help is something that I think we looked down on, and it got a bad rap, inappropriate,
Yeah.
definitely inappropriately so. So, and I was a medic in the military. I saw all kinds of things, and, you know, realizing all the need for mental health care as well, is so real. And for some reason, there's shame that goes along with it. I mean, it's part of it. So I'm brand new to the seeking help part of it. So that's okay.
Well, I think even just by sharing this today and sharing it with your colleagues, it helps break that stigma and allow other people to say, I remember someone close to me was a firefighter for many years and started calling his buddies and saying, hey, are you guys having this stuff going on? And no one had ever talked about it. But once that conversation was started, every single person that he spoke to was dealing with the
Yep.
same
Yep.
symptoms. So talking about it makes a huge impact.
It
So we
does.
have our first question. And then if
Awesome.
anyone else has questions, please type them in now. We have a few more minutes left.
And by
Um,
the way, the answer is yes, I have children, which explains all of this gray. Okay. Every bit of it.
yeah, I only have a 7-week-old and I'm thinking the grades are coming in soon.
Oh, bless you, my child.
So I'm joking though. I love being her mom. The first question is, what does old Dave wish that he could have told the Dave today?
Um, what do I wish today that I told my younger self? Um,
Yes.
I, to understand trauma sooner, and the impacts of trauma sooner. I've always been, one of the best things about me as an investigator was also really, really good an interviewer and interrogator. They're very different things, and I'm not being flippant, but to understand that impact of trauma even sooner would have helped me be even more empathetic as I went forward. Um, I think, um, yeah, I don't know. I think I've always been pretty good about knowing that immediate change is really rare. So to be able to have the patience that was one thing I was not when I started in law enforcement, was patient, and patience is required to do the job. So I think one thing I would tell young Dave is, like, first of all, stop drinking Coca-Cola, okay? Because it's so bad for you. I would have told you that, because I didn't drink coffee. It was not my caffeine source. But yeah, understand trauma and you understand the impacts of that really, really well. And to seek help when you need it. I did not understand that part at all, and I'm not going to pretend that I understand it fully now. But also, I think I was early on, at least until I really got enmeshed in the anti-trafficking side of it, I was much more of a, we do it our way, and you, like, tree hugging NGO people over there, you just want stuff that's unrealistic and everything else. And so to have an earlier understanding of the value of collaborative relationships with non-governmental agencies, I think would have been key too.
Mm,
I don't know if
those
that
are
is
great answers. I'm glad you quit the Coca-Cola. It's very bad for
so
you.
bad, so bad for you. When it can clean your car's battery, that's a problem.
It's a huge problem.
A real
We
problem.
have another question. How do you balance empathy with self-care?
Um, that's a really good question, and I'm not going to pretend that I've mastered it. Self-care for me, I mean, there's a lot of things that I do for self-care, and one of them that's hugely important to me is exercise. There's a ton to that, and that it's the endorphin release is very real, and it has true help. I think empathy allows me to be able to get through the moments that are going to cause me to need self-care, if that makes sense. Because me being empathetic with somebody who's been horrifically abused um, doesn't mean I understand. Let's never pretend I understand what they're going through, because I haven't gone through that. But empathetic of the need for somebody who is going to listen to them honestly and who is going to engage with them honestly. I do know about that, and I do understand that, and I can speak to those issues. It enables me to actually engage relationally with the people that I'm working with, whether they're victims, whether they're even actual traffickers, but whether they're just witnesses in some capacity. But with victims, the ones who have actually gone through the abuse, it allows me to gain their trust sooner. That empathetic, honest, empathetic approach. Not, listen, don't put on fake agent face or fake I care face, because they have BS meters that are far more sensitive than our own, and they're going to see right through that in a second. So just be who you are, and be genuine. If you make a mistake, acknowledge that you made a mistake and move forward. Those kinds of things. But that enables me to go deeper with the people that I'm with. And when I go deeper with people that I'm with, that's when I get exposed to the things that are significantly more traumatic. Right. And so that empathy gets me into places that I actually need help from. So.
Wow, Dave, I love how you so eloquently articulated that. I remember a time when I was living in Uganda, and there was a really horrific case that we were working with, and I didn't feel anything. Usually I would have an emotional response, and
Mhm.
I didn't have that emotional response, and I knew
Felt
then that I
bad.
was in desperate need of self-care,
Mhm.
because that wasn't me. My true self is impacted by these stories, and I knew that my empathetic response was really overworked and
Yeah.
tired. So I think you're so correct about the relationship between those two things.
I think it's really important too to have a good support network around you, whether it's professional care or not. I mean, I've been blessed in my entire career with a wife who wants me to do well and wants me to pursue my passions, but who is also willing to say, hey man, are you done being special agent guy? Can you be husband and father guy now? And she'll call me on that, because I will come home from 2 weeks in Uganda and immediately get on the phone with some other people. And she's like, no, 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 no. I need you to remember there are components of your life that are actually separate from that. So it's important too. My
I think.
faith is, faith is a massive part of that for me. I mean, that's not true for everybody, and I understand that's not true for everybody, but I find for me, prayer is a big part of it. Being surrounded by people who know me, know what I'm going through, and who will call me to account when I'm actually, because I get cynical, I get sarcastic, when I get like when you got numb and didn't even respond in that situation, that's like massive red flares going off saying, hey, something's amiss, you need care, and that's what I love about being surrounded by people who know me well enough to call me out,
Yeah.
and that I trust enough to take it from them. Because I'd hear that same words from other people and we'd be going to Nuck City, but I'd hear this thing from other people and I want to hear it because I know they care about my heart, you know.
Mhm.
So
So important. Well, we are at the close of our
aw,
time together. I can't believe it. Dave, I just really value how genuine you are and how
aw.
authentic. This was such a life-giving conversation.
Oh, you're so sweet, Kelsey. I love that we get to hang out, even this way, right? Even on
Yeah.
the computer, it's fun. And you don't look like you just gave birth 7 months ago. So I'm
We
just telling you, or weeks, sorry, not months, 7 weeks ago. I'm sorry. Yeah. I
That's
mean,
okay.
I think makeup's doing an amazing job hiding the sleep circles, right? You know what I mean, or something.
Oh yeah, they're there.
Yeah, so no, I love that we have become friends. I love that organizationally we have become good partners, and I think it's truly going to have an impact. And this has been so much fun. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. I know that, Dave, you have really informed a lot of my understanding of investigations and how law enforcement works with the anti-trafficking space, how we can work together. So thank you for always imparting your wisdom to
Sure.
me and for sharing it with our our people here today. We're getting some thank yous
It's
from
awesome.
our
Thank you all.
participants.
Thank you all.
So
Thanks for
thank you, and thank
supporting
you,
Willow. So if you guys are supporting Willow, thank you for that. So, and don't
thank
forget
you.
the Human
Yes.
Trafficking.
And please do check out the Human Trafficking Institute. We are, as you heard, huge fans of their work, and we thank you all for joining us and spending time with us today.
That's it. Are there any other questions or anything on this? So, nope, we're good.
I think we're good. So thank you everyone so much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you all. Be safe, everyone. Thanks. Bye, Kelsey.
Bye, Dave.